My name is Jordan. I'm with the customer experience team here at RightCapital. And first of all, thank you for joining today's session. We're actually going to be walking through the key features, some practical applications, and real-world examples of how the estate module can make a measurable difference in your workflow. So we've made some great enhancements over the past few weeks, including customizable estate checklists, the ability to switch between current, proposed, or any other plans you've created, along with an easier way to propose trusts. So just to be clear, on the agenda today, we'll be covering just an overview of the state module along with those new features, including proposing trusts. We'll go over some kind of like common use cases for presenting to clients, some real world examples. And finally, depending on time before the top of the hour, we'll have a live Q&A. So quick housekeeping items before we get started here. Session is recorded, so we will send you a copy after the webinar. So if you get pulled away for any reason or you have a meeting coming up or anything like that, again, shortly after this is actually finished, you'll get an email with the recording. So again, if you miss it or you just want it playing in the background while you actually work on an estate plan for a client, whichever works best for you, you'll get that sent to your email. And lastly, again, like I mentioned, we will have a Q&A session at the very end. So please feel free to ask any questions throughout the webinar and we'll review at the end. If we end up running out of time, we will follow up with anybody we miss. But again, that'll depend on time at the end. But with that, let's kind of jump in and get started. So I'm going to share my screen here for everybody. And I'm just going to start on the advisor portal. So the plan I'm going to be using today is my Luke Skywalker plan. Anyone who's viewed the last few webinars for overview of the planning modules will be familiar with this one. Again, I won't go super in depth with this plan today, but this is what I'm going to be using as an example. And I'll bring us in here. Overall, this plan is very strong, doesn't really have any issues. It should have a 100% probability of success. They have a pretty healthy amount of assets. I'll give you an idea of how I have it set up today, but they have roughly 176,000 in the bank, a little over 750,000 in investments. They have their own home with a various amount of loans, some other assets. So overall, a strong plan, just giving everyone an idea of what they actually look like kind of going in. But with that, we can just jump into the state and get started. So within, excuse me, within the estate module, there are three different sections. There's checklist, beneficiary, and finally the analysis tab. Now, a lot of what you're actually going to be doing in the estate tab will probably be in the analysis, but we do want to take some time and actually go through what checklist and beneficiary actually do. So to kind of get started here, we're going to be in the checklist section. Again, this is just under estate. Very first item is checklist, and it looks something like this. And we'll have checklist items for both the main and co-client in this case. Now, to get started, what I want to say for this one is, studies show that only about 33% of adults in the US have actually begun preparing estate planning documents. And for many people, even basic estate plan components like wills or trusts or power of attorneys can be daunting. So the main idea with something like the checklist is just make that a lot easier. With a tool like this, it doesn't have to be overwhelming, and it just gets you started on that conversation, because I think a big part of this is just getting them thinking about it, and the checklist is a great way to do that. So how does this actually work? Very, very simple. Basically, we have a number of default items here. So we have will, power of attorney, living will, healthcare proxy, beneficiary designations, and living trust. These are all default items. I have another one here called Will Part 2. We'll go over that in a second. That's actually from a custom template. But these 6 items you see here will be in every plan starting out, right? And again, the way this works is actually very simple. So for example, for here we have the will, right? So let's say, we were starting this estate conversation. We go like, well, first of all, I think these clients are in their mid 40s. They have a kid who is going to be in college soon. So it's like, hey, it's probably a good idea for you to have will set up. Very simple. The idea is if they actually have that document, check it off. You can put in additional details here, like the name of the executor or the guardian, the time the document was last updated, and you're all set. An important note is that this doesn't actually affect any calculations in the system or anything like that. We're not like actually tracking whether they have a will for like the actual estate analysis with things like taxes or anything like that. It's purely just, hey, do we have this set up or not? So if you have your own way of tracking this kind of thing, you don't have to use this. Obviously, again, it's not affecting anything in the system. However, again, the main point being, if they have not started, this is a very easy way when you're getting started in your estate conversations to say like, hey, we really need to start looking into this and start checking some of these items off. Now, all these are a little bit different. This is the will. So for example, it says like, where's the name of the executor? What's the name of the guardian? I can put in just about anything here. So let's say that's who's actually executing the will here. But I can also check this off. You can do it for both Luke and Mara here. So both co-client and our main client and co-client. And all these will be a little bit different. So for example, power of attorney, you'll ask, hey, what is the power of attorney? Most of them will have this item here, which is the time the document was last updated. This part especially can be very helpful, even if you don't put in things like the name of the power of attorney. Even if you just go in here to keep track of like, hey, when was the last time we updated the will? When's the last time we made sure that the power of attorney is correct? That can be helpful, but nothing crazy here. The main thing we want to go over, and this is actually one of the updates we've seen recently, is creating estate checklist templates and actually making this more of a custom field. So like I mentioned, I have this one here, Will Part 2, which I just threw together. But the way you can actually do that, if I go to the action items at the very bottom of the page here and go to edit, this will open up this section. So again, these are the default 6, right? This is what all of them are going to start with. But I can go in and actually add additional sections. So I put this one in last second as kind of just a joke to get us started, basically. But there are real examples here that are very helpful. So for example, one that is a little bit more common could be something like a property deed. So now, again, not everyone's going to have this, but the main idea is like, hey, if this is something you actually want to be worrying about, we can put this in. You don't have to look at or like jury rig one of these items to work as this. You can actually go in, put this in if there's going to be something important, and then we can say something like, this is the, let's see, like property. Just because this says property deed, we can make sure like, hey, which is the actual property you're looking at? Say property name, for example, keep that to last updated date. You can add in additional fields here as well. So if I wanted to put in multiple properties or something like that, I could do that, but we'll just keep it to one for now. And then when I press save, click save again, it'll be on that list. It will show up here. So then I can start checking it off. This will give me the option to actually put in those additional details here. So I can say this is the, I don't know, the main street address, something like that. Again, I won't go in super amounts of detail here, but the main idea being you can make these custom to whatever you want. An additional little thing you can do here as well. When I hover over any of these checklist items, you'll see these little 6 dots appear on the left-hand side. My mouse kind of covers a bit if I go over there. But what this means, you can actually drag and drop these items wherever you want. So for example, again, this is more of a joke example, but I could say, hey, I just needed more fields for the will. Press save and it will be right under there. So if you need to put like a bunch of additional information for the will, you can actually do that. Again, you don't have to name it part 2 or anything like that. But then you can go in, make a bunch of custom fields. Maybe you need to have like additional names attached to it. Press save, and then I can go in and make sure like, hey, I got to get all these different names in here, something like that. So again, this is not a required feature by any means. If you skip over the checklist, it's not going to mean the plan is incomplete or anything like that. This is purely just a bonus. This is just, hey, if you need to put these items in here, you want to make sure they're being tracked properly. Even if you just want to show this to your client to start out and go, hey, we need to start thinking about these things, even if it's not immediately. It's just a good way to kind of start that conversation. And one thing I'll actually show here, again, like I mentioned, we can make these custom fields. So for example, property deed, right? That's a custom field. But what you don't want to do is if you end up using this often, so if you end up using the estate checklist, it becomes part of your workflow, you're not going to want to go into every single new plan, make all the new sections. Let's say, you did another one for like plan for estate taxes or something like that. If I had a few additional items I wanted to put in every single um, plan, I wouldn't want to go in and do this for every single client plan. It's just ridiculous, right? You would be doing this way more than you need to. So that's where templates come in. So how does the template work? It's actually very simple. So I'm in the client plan right now. What I can actually do is go back to the advisor portal. I'm actually going to open this link in a new tab just to make this a little bit easier. But this will bring us back to, let me fight with the Zoom controls here. There we go. This will bring us back to the advisor portal. This is where we started. This is the first page you'll see when you log in. Very simple. What I can do from here, I can go to this templates option at the very top, and then finally this estate checklist option. So once I click into that, you can already see here I have my default estate checklist. This is the one we originally started with. But I can actually build out, hey, what do I want the estate checklist to look like ahead of time? That way it's just saved. This is a great way to just be efficient and create some consistency in your financial plans. All of them look and have that kind of same feel to them. Again, all the different templates will do that, but we're only looking at this one today. But for making a new one, again, it's very simple. If I just press new template here, it'll already start with the first six. You can disable these if you don't want it. Like if we don't want to worry about a living trust and we're not going to do beneficiary designations or maybe healthcare proxies a little bit more uncommon. You can just turn those off and then I can add a section. So let's say, again, that one I was doing earlier, like a property deed, right? So I could say, hey, has this been done? Checkbox name. Again, I'll just put name as an example, and we could say this is property name. Press save. That'll be in there. I can change its location. Same way, I can drag and drop. So I can put that up here, a little bit up further. And then that's really it. Again, I can come here. I could say this is going to be, under 40 state checklist. So you can make multiple of these you wanted, for example. So for example, if you have a client who's, maybe like in their 40s, under their 40s, this isn't something they really need to be thinking about that intently, but maybe you have another group of clients that's post-retirement. This is something you need to be a little bit more aware of. You can set up different checklists for that, make sure they're applied to each plan. And once you're set up with this, again, applying it is very simple. There's two ways to do it. So the first is I can just go to apply template in the bottom right, click that, and just look up a client. So for example, I could look up, my Luke plan, for example. I could look by client groups. So I could look up like an entire group of clients I've set up and apply that to them. But in this case, I'll just do the one, press save. It'll say like, hey, it's going to replace any existing estate checklist that's currently in there. So again, if you are replacing some information, just be aware of that. Maybe write down the information if you're going to apply a template first, something like that. But anyway, I can press confirm. That will then apply. We'll take a look at that in a second, make sure it actually went through. But there's one more thing I want to show, which is you can make this the default for a client group. So the other thing you don't really want to do is every single time you make a client, you have to come back to this templates estate checklist page and apply the template to the person you just set up. It's kind of ridiculous. No one wants to do that. So what you can do is if you just have a client group, for a fact that when you add clients to it, you want them to have this. You can actually set that up as a default. And again, this goes for any of the templates. So this doesn't just work for this, but obviously this is the example we're using today. But to actually do that, what I can do, again, this is going to be in the advisor portal again. So we're not going into the client plan or anything like that. But if I go to these three dots up here, if I go there and then press client settings, it'll bring us to this page first. And then I want client groups. So again, just one more time, that's the three dots here. We call this the more menu. So you go to this more menu, you go to client settings, and then client groups. And you'll see this is the list of all the clients I have, right? Or the client groups I have. Very simple. What I can then do, this is actually my default group for new clients. So this is perfect. I can go to edit, and right here, I can set the default estate checklist. So for example, I can make it the under 40. Maybe I don't work with a lot of older clients or anything like that. I can set that and we're all set. And again, this works for any of the other templates. I could adjust my onboarding template, my snapshot view, vault folders, categories, any of that type of stuff. But in this case, we'll just do this one. Press save, and that's it. So any client that's added now into existing clients will start with that estate checklist from the get-go. So I don't have to go and apply it every single time I make a new client. And with that being said, now that I have that applied, if I go back to the estate checklist, so this is how it was set up before. Remember this. Great. What I can do, because I applied that, I'm going to refresh the page and we should see that new setup exactly. So we got property deed, a lot of the other items are missing. So this is definitely a lot simpler and even still lets me add in those default ones. So if you use this default, but you find that, hey, this client's a little bit more specific, they need a little bit more out of the checklist than somebody else, you still have that option to go in. It doesn't matter if the templates can be applied. So you can still customize this client on their own. But again, that's really the checklist. So again, not necessary. You're not going to miss out on anything necessarily by not using this, but if you really need to get a conversation started about estate planning, honestly, checklist is a good way to do it. Just because it's very simple. It's like, hey, we just need to get your will done. Oh, it's done. Great. Add it. We're good. So that's a lot easier than, possibly bringing up an entirely new software, something like that. So attach their financial plan makes it a lot simpler. But anyway, with that, this will bring us to the beneficiary section. So the beneficiary section here can help provide clients with kind of the peace of mind that comes with knowing their assets will end up in the right place. It's very similar to the checklist in a way where this doesn't actually affect anything in the system necessarily. So for example, right, I've got all these joint accounts, all these invested assets. This is Luke's account, right? What I can do is say like, hey, if something happens to him, who's getting the 401k, right? And I can come here and say, hey, this will go to his wife, Mara, great, and then contingent would be his son, Ben, right? Press save, that's all set. Now, what I'm not saying is in the system, when he actually passes away on his planning horizon, the money will immediately go to Mara. It's not what we're saying. This is purely, again, just a visual. It's just a checklist. We can't actually set up primary beneficiary information in the system for accounts, but that's not what we do here. Again, this is purely kind of a checklist. So, and again, this works for basically all accounts in here. So it's not just for bank and invested assets. There's also life insurance, things like that. So we can make sure, hey, we know where all this is going. So again, similar to the checklist, this is one of those places where what I would want to do is go in here and say, hey, this is how we have it set up, right? Based on the documents you've given me, these are the beneficiaries you have for these accounts, but we're missing some. So for an example, these are Luke's accounts, right? So you could say, hey, he's got beneficiary information for all of these, right? He knows that Mar and Ben will be primary and contingent beneficiary for all of these. That's already been set up. But maybe we don't have that for Mara's 401k, right? Or maybe only she has Luke. Hey, you don't have a contingent beneficiary for this. We should probably set that up. Something like that. So again, it's more just keeping track. This isn't an absolutely absurd number of accounts, but there's definitely those plans where you go in and they have 20, sometimes even 30 different accounts and insurance policies and savings and whatever. It can be definitely very tricky to keep track of. This just tries to make that process a little bit easier, and it really just highlights, hey, are we missing anything? That's kind of the number one thing I use this for. Now, kind of moving past that, if I go to the action items, click edit, very simple. I can just choose what accounts are available in here. So for example, there's a 529 that's not currently present. I can select that, press save. It'll become available in here. Again, it'll have the same kind of options as everything else, primary beneficiary, contingent beneficiary. That's really it. Again, I won't go into crazy detail here because what you see is what you get here. You can name the beneficiaries for each account. The only thing I will highlight is that there are a number of different items you can put in here. So we can say, not just like, hey, it's going to be the spouse or a child, but we could say it's going to charity, it's going to a trust, it's going to, some spread of their children and grandchildren, or you can just put in custom and then just write an amount. So I can say, hey, Mars 401k is going to Han for whatever reason, press save. There you go. Right. Very simple. So again, not necessary. If you don't use the beneficiary tab, you're not missing out on anything necessarily. You're not making a worse financial plan, nothing like that. But again, it's just an easy way to track these items. You've already got a lot of their financial information in the system. Why not just have this information attached? Makes that process a lot easier, and it's always tucked away in this tab here. So that'll basically do it for the checklist and beneficiary tabs. Again, the main point being you're not going to miss tons if you skip on them. I know I'm saying this over and over again, but there's a lot of people that can concern that like, hey, if I don't have a beneficiary set up, is the estate going to be able to calculate where the money's going? Yes. Again, it's not affecting calculations. The main point is just making that job a little bit easier if that's what you need to do for the client, right? Now, this will bring us to the analysis section. This is where the estate tab actually starts getting into the weeds. This is where it starts to shine. This is really the main tab you're probably going to be in estate. And one thing I mentioned is we've already gone through checklist and beneficiary. If you're really introducing someone to estate, something I like to say is like, it's good to just go through these items. Even if you're not going to be really going in deep with the checklist and beneficiary, it's good to start, kind of get them accustomed to the type of conversations you're going to have here. That way, once we get to the analysis, we're a little bit more prepared because, especially for clients, if they jump in and just see this visual, this might be confusing. I know there's a lot of people, when I used to be on support that really ask me what's going on here. And we'll get into that. But kind of going through these tabs is a nice way to ease them in. And again, this gets us to analysis. So analysis, there's a lot of different items to kind of check here. So first off, there are 4 different tabs in here. There's flow, comparison, details, and trust. If you are looking on your side, so if you have RightCapital pulled up on your side, you might not see this trust tab. So an important note to make is that that trust tab will not appear unless you have one irrevocable trust entered within the plan. So I do have an irrevocable trust set up, therefore I will see this tab. If you don't see it, it's because you just don't have an irrevocable trust. So if you don't see this, don't be concerned. You're not missing out on anything necessarily. It just depends on whether you have that in there or not. Now to start, we will be on this flow chart. Again, when I was on support, I got a ton of different questions about what's going on here. It looks very complicated. I promise it's not. And it really just starts with what is in a state and what's out of a state. This is what this is mostly focused on. This will deal with things like taxes, but the thing I always kind of talked about was, hey, if you can just focus on what's in the estate versus what's out of the estate, this will be a lot simpler. So to start, what are we looking at? Well, very simple. What we're looking at is in order of who's passing away first. So in my plan, Mara actually passes away first and then Luke passes afterwards. So she will be the first one up. And what I can do is say, hey, what's in her total net worth? She really just has the investments. I think in this plan, they have some joint accounts, but she alone only has her 401k. So that's what this is basically looking at. It'll show her estate. Again, same thing. That's just her investment accounts. She doesn't have life insurance. It will then calculate once she passes, what are her taxes and fees. There's other items in here like probate and funeral expenses. We'll go over those. The inheritance will then go to Luke's estate, added to his net worth. And then lastly, when he passes, he will also have his taxes and fees. And then the rest that's left over will go to the estate to heirs, and then that total at the bottom. So very simple. The flow in this chart is quite literally, hey, here's the first client. This is where their assets are going. There's taxes and fees. The inheritance then goes to the surviving client, in this case, who's Luke. They're then calculated tax and fees when they pass. That goes to heirs. This is the total, right? Now, there is this other section. So this is out of estate. Very simply, this is just money we pulled out before they actually passed. So all the money we're seeing here is money that they were actually holding on in their net worth. Specifically, they were holding on to that cash. They didn't give it to anybody. It didn't go to charity. Didn't go to their heirs. Once they pass away, it stays quote unquote in estate. They're calculated. Their taxes are calculated on it, and then it goes to the total. Out of estate means this money got out beforehand. Now, it could be as a gift. I just set up that I was going to give my grandkids some amount of money every single year. That'll show up here. Same thing with gifts to charity, donor advised funds, and most importantly, trusts, right? So in this case, I actually have multiple trusts set up, some of which are going to the heirs. So this money is getting out early. Some of which is going to charity. This money is also getting out early. And then you can actually see like, hey, overall, this money in the blue is what went to the heirs, and then this amount went to charity. So again, first view, this can look very complicated. Again, I promise it's not. Mostly, you just want to be focused on, again, and I'm going to say it multiple times here, what's in a state, what was out of a state. That's the main focus here. And then from there, you can track, hey, what are their taxes, what money is going to their heirs, and what money goes to charity. So kind of these 3 colors are the other big focus here. Just, hey, where is the money ending up? Is it being taken by the government? Is it going to the heirs? Or is it going to charity? Very simple. Now, there is a lot we can do here. So this isn't static. Now we're going to pull this information we're seeing here from the actual plan itself. So when I see things like Luke's estate, this is actually the assets I have set up in the plan. So this is their real estate. This is their investments. This is any debts they have left over, right? That all goes to the total. That is from the information I set up in profile. But that actually gets us to a new update for the estate module, if you're familiar with it, is before, as of a couple of weeks ago, you could only look at the estate module from the proposed plan. So before, when I went to the estate module here to analysis, the information I saw here only came from the proposed plan. There was no option to switch it to a different plan. That is now no longer the case. Due to a recent update, you can actually go to this item here and actually pick any of the plans in the system. So current plan will come from profile, proposed plan comes from whatever I have set up in the retirement analysis section. And I even have this additional proposed plan of move to Florida. So overall, again, that's a big update. You can actually pull from different plans now. So if these are radically different plans, I can actually switch between them. That'll give me different numbers. In this case, I don't think actually it makes a pretty big difference in this case. So I guess them moving to Florida at some point results in a lot more assets. But again, the main point is that, you're not restricted to one. You can now switch between multiple different plans. So that's a huge update. That was a massive feed of feedback from a lot of advisors, and it's been finally implemented. So that can definitely help with that planning. Moving on, again, like I mentioned, this is not a static flow chart. So while it does pull information from something like the profile or even different proposed plans under retirement analysis, we can make adjustments, right? And I've already actually got a few set up. So if I go to the action items at the bottom, there's a bunch of different items in here we can adjust. And it's broken down into three sections. So we have the planning horizon, other information, and then proposed and existing trust, or really just the trust section. So right off the bat, planning horizon, very simple. We're just tracking, hey, when did they actually pass away? That's it, right? So here I can say, either we're going to follow the plan's value where they both pass away at 90. In fact, one thing I'll actually show is if I have one of them pass away before the other. So right now, Mara's passing away first. If I actually set this to Luke passing away first at 80 years old and then press refresh, he will actually jump to the top here. So this will always follow, hey, who passes away first, and then second person gets their assets. So if you ever change this, that won't, that will actually reflect that. But again, you can customize to whatever you want. Again, my default is to have them at 90, but I can go in and say, hey, what if one of them lives to be 100? Maybe his parents lived that long. Well, I guess in Luke's case, probably not, but that's beside the point. Anyway, moving on to other information. So other information can cover a few different things. The main two are right here. So it's funeral expenses and probate expenses. I can change these to be whatever I want. These then reflect here. So for example, the $69,000 in taxes and fees that Mara will pay when she passes away are reflected here. These are the probate, these are funeral expenses. I can go in, change this to 5,000, press refresh, and that'll reflect in the taxes and fees here. Obviously, this is larger than 5,000. We are still going to grow this with inflation. So I think they're currently in their 40s in this plan. They're going to 90. So this is, roughly 50 years worth of inflation we're seeing. So just keep that in mind. If you're putting in a number, put it in today's dollars, and it will actually reflect that in the estate. Other is probate. Again, this is just a percentage. This doesn't affect every account, but it will affect, the accounts that will be subject to probate. You can change this to whatever you want to be. I've seen people change this as high as like a 15% or a 20%, say like, hey, I really think the government's going to go after these. Whatever it may be, you can change that percentage, press refresh, we'll see that reflect. So higher or lower, depending on what you want. Our default is 5%, but you can change this to whatever you want, depending on what you or the client is really thinking is going to happen. With that, there's a bunch of these other items here, mostly around gifts and things like that, really adjusting kind of these sections of the estate. Now, you can mess around with these quite a bit. By default, they won't actually be selected. So usually when you come into the estate module, it will actually just look like this. So it will only show funeral and probate expenses. It's nice and clean. But if I want to, I can go in, add all these different items and say, hey, over their lifetimes, Luke paid a ton in gifts, maybe paid up to $500,000, something huge, and then we'll see that reflect at some point within the plan. So you can go in and make a bunch of different adjustments here. The main point being you're not completely restricted within the estate. You can make some adjustments, especially with gifts, funeral expenses, probates. You don't have to go all the way back to the other plan in profile and retirement analysis and start setting these things up early. Which brings us to probably the most important adjustment you can make within the estate module, which is proposing trusts. So with trust, there's really two ways to do it in RightCapital. And I'm not going to go into extreme detail about trust. That is an entirely different, presentation in terms of what trust we can and can't use, things like that. I won't go into super amounts of detail. If that's something you're interested in, let us know. We can do an entire webinar just about trusts themselves. But really broad strokes, how do trusts work? There's two ways to show them, and it's really actually already shown here. So we have existing trusts and we have proposed trusts. Very simple. Existing trusts are ones that are set up outside of the estate module. So right here, I have this one, trust investment account. This is an irrevocable grantor trust. I actually have this set up in the current plan. So if I press OK, if I go to their profile, go to their investments, it's actually set up here. And I've seen some people actually express confusion like, hey, I didn't know you could have trust be the owner of an account in RightCapital. It's very simple to set these up. Any investment account or most investment accounts you can set as a trust. Once you set the owner to a trust, it will give you some different options. Again, I'm not going to go through every single one of these. You can see on the screen the different options we have available. But I can set this up in the current plan, show that they already have it, press save. And then again, when I go back to estate analysis, this will be available in the action items, right? Very simple. Second ones are proposed trusts. So I already have two right here, but what these are trusts that are added in the estate module. So again, existing were created outside of the estate module, proposed were created within the estate module. Very simple. How do you actually add them? This is one of our actually new additions. This used to look a little bit different, but it's been streamlined a little bit. Previously, you had to go to the edit button here to propose a new trust. That is no longer the case. Now they're just available right here. I can open this up and say, hey, I want to do let's say another charitable remainder trust, because that's an easy example. I can go in, say they're going to put in, I don't know, $250,000 in this trust. I'll say it's got no trust fees and nothing like that. I'll say they're going to fund it, let's say 2050. Let's say that's something they're going to do further into their retirement. I can even set the cost basis for what money is going into this and then press save. Very simple. Now, what will actually fund the trust? That is a question we get semi-often. It can depend, but generally it's going to get added to their cash flows. We'll go over how you can see that in a little bit more detail later, but the main idea is like, hey, this is going to cause them to transition some of their money over. You can control some of that with the cost basis amount here, but generally it will shown as a negative on their cash flow sheet, and then it'll fund that trust with whatever resources has available. So if you have a ton of taxable results or a ton of taxable assets available and your withdrawal order says to pull from taxable first, typically it's going to pull from that. So that's generally how it works. But again, this is all very broad strokes. I'm not going to go into trust in super amounts of detail here. But as I can see, their trust to charity amount has skyrocketed. In fact, it dropped this by about $1 million. And what I can do here is just say whether I want them to be in here or not. So something I used to see very commonly on support is you'd have people set up multiple different trusts and go, well, I know I want them to have one of them, but I'm not really sure which one I want them to use. Pretty easy. You can just say, hey, if this is the one we really want to focus on, I can set both of these to be excluded. Press refresh, and we should see, yeah, like that trust errors has dropped, trust to charity has dropped, but now we're seeing that one basically on its own, right? So again, I'll kind of show the different types of trusts you can add in. Again, we're not going to go over all of these, but the main point is you can add a number of different trusts in here and then really propose, hey, what impact does it have on the plan? Do we want to go with a charitable remainder trust? Do we want to go with, this irrevocable grantor trust instead? However we want to set this up. Again, estate planning can definitely get complex, especially with trusts. Something I definitely recommend, because we're not going to go into a ton of detail with this today, is if you ever have any questions on setting up these trusts or making sure that any of this works the correct way, please just reach out to our support team. Definitely look into the help center. Again, trusts are very complicated, but we are experienced with working with these. So again, check out that help center. We have tons of articles on all sorts of trusts. If I actually show this really quickly, I believe. If I go back to the advisor portal here, let's see here. If I go to the advisor portal, let it load, there we go. If I press the help center here, excuse me, I gotta fight with Zoom here a little bit. There we go. If I go to the help center, if I look up trusts, there is a ton of different information in here. So there's a whole overview on them. There's actually specific articles on different types of trust, and go in here again. There's tons of different information. We have tons of information on every type of trust and what it actually looks like setting them up. So again, if you ever have any questions, I definitely recommend starting with the help center. These can be complex, so it's good to just double check your work. And if all else fails, again, we have our support team. They are more than welcome to jump on, a short call with you, even a scheduled call, to kind of go over the best way to set these up. Again, trusts are complicated. You don't have to go about it alone. So that's definitely the best way to recommend, finding out how to work with these. Anyway, so That's enough on the trust section. But overall, the main point I'm just trying to show here is again, the estate flow chart shows where their money from the system is actually going, how we can divert it to places outside of the estate, how to avoid those taxes and fees once they actually get to their estate planning or actually start passing away. Um, One thing I like to mention here, and this is something I talked about in support, is there's a few people that talk about like, well, estate planning is great, but I don't know if that's something I really want to talk about with my clients. It's not something I really go over, which is a fair assessment. Again, there's a lot of people that work with clients that this is just not on their radar. They're either too young or it's not something they want to worry about. This is where I actually argue that the estate tab can be very helpful in planning, is that it's always here. Obviously, I have some adjustments in here based on, like I've changed their funeral expenses. I have some gifts added on here, things like that. I have like a, different trust setup. But even if I don't go into this tab, the information from the rest of the system is still in here. It's still tracking what happens to their assets after they pass away and things like that. So something I always mention is just like, look, you don't have to use this all the time. This isn't something that has to come up with every plan. But the real benefit is that, hey, if you just have a financial plan set up for somebody, this information is available. You can always just go to the estate analysis tab and you have this information already set up. So if this is something you need to start thinking about with a client, part of the data is already done. You don't have to set up one of these flowcharts yourself. You don't have to go into Excel and start figuring out like, okay, what accounts are going to deal with probate? How is that going to work? What do those fees actually look like? Part of the work is already done. You've already got an idea of what their estates are going to look like adjusted for inflation. You already got an idea of where the assets are going to stay in the estate or go out of the estate. So part of that's done. So again, the main thing I always talk about with the estate modules, even if this isn't going to be like a really common place for you to go with your clients, it's already there. So when the conversation does get there, it's a lot easier. So again, that's one of the main benefits I see from the estate module. But that being said, we've been on flow far too long here. I will move us through a few of the other tabs. So moving on to comparison. Comparison's pretty simple. Basically, what it's just looking at is, hey, what is the difference in the planning based on the proposal you set up? So I have this charitable remainder trust. What we can see here is that, hey, with the proposed trust strategy I set up, we have a little bit less money going to the heirs. We have a little bit more money going to charity, and taxes and fees are, similar. It's a little bit less with the proposed trust strategy. But it's just a simpler way to show the difference. The one thing you don't really want to get caught up in is turning this on and off and checking all the numbers, especially when you're doing a presentation. It's just kind of clunky. This way, with comparison, you can just have it set up and go, hey, what's the difference? Look, your heirs get a little bit less money, but there's a little bit more goes to charity, and your overall taxes and fees are less. So maybe that's beneficial, right? And it'll just put this into numbers as well on the right side. That makes that a little bit easier. Similar thing for retirement income. Now, this is more if you were proposing gifts, different gift strategies in here, anything like that. But you can actually just track what their income looks like in retirement, where it's going, make sure that you're not causing a shortage because you're starting up a bunch of gifts or anything like that later in the plan. If this looks familiar, it's actually pretty much the same chart from the retirement analysis section. So if I jump over here and go to the retirement details page, it's pretty much just this page brought over to the estate module. So if this is something you do need to look at while you're doing estate planning, it's already in the estate module. You don't need to jump back to retirement like I just did. You can just go to comparison, click this little drop down here, and you've got their retirement income. So very simple. Again, if you need it, and it also does follow the proposed strategy. So if you notice, it has them going to 100. If I switch the plan value back to 90, press refresh, that should decrease. There we go. So very simple. Next up, look at details. Details it's effectively the flow. It's just in more of a balance sheet like view. So, if this is something you need more as like a printout, this can be a little bit easier, but it's just generally showing like, hey, where were the assets? What did their investments look like at the time of estate planning, or I guess at the time of their passing, I should say. What did they have in different types of trusts? It even breaks it out by the type. So this is what was in charitable remainder trust versus irrevocable grantor trust. Again, if I go in here and say, this is included, we should see that number reflect. So we should see that charitable remainder jump right up. So again, very similar to the flow. I won't spend a lot of time here. You can obviously see what this is kind of doing here. But again, if you need that a little bit more detailed view without all the different colors and boxes and things like that, this is a little bit easier. Lastly is going to be the trust section. Again, this is only going to appear if you have an irrevocable trust available. It's not going to show if you don't. So I'm not going to delete mine from my plan. But again, if I don't have an irrevocable trust in here, this will not appear. It's just going to show flow comparison details. That's it. That being said, if you do have the irrevocable trust, basically this is just a cash flow view of what's going on with that. So for example, I can see the beginning balance of the trust is only 15,000, but it gradually gets some return over time. I don't take any income from this, so we're not really going to see any taxes and fees or anything like that, but it'll reflect that again in the cash flow like view. And you can even track between the different trusts we have in there. So there's also that charitable remainder trust. We can, jump through here, see what that looks like over time. Again, nothing overly complicated here, but just really trying to see, what do these trusts look like in detail over time, because that's not something you're going to see, if I jump back to details, you're not seeing this over time. You're just seeing that final number. So going to that trust section really allows you kind of see this over time and just track like, hey, what does it look like by 2060 if in case, you guys pass away early or something like that. But that will really do it for estate analysis. Again, there's a lot of detail in here. I'm not going to go absolutely 100% in depth on everything here. We're not going to look at every separate trust and their impact or anything like that. But the main idea, again, is that, look, it's always here. It's pulling in the information for the rest of the plan with their estate. It's always available. So if you ever need to really start this conversation with somebody, which, at least from what we've seen, tends to be the hardest part, is just getting that conversation started, this makes it a little bit easier. You're not running in with a bunch of Excel sheets and stuff like that that can be hard to understand. You have some nice visuals to work with, and it can make that process, again, just a little bit less daunting and help clients feel a little bit more prepared for this. Now, the last thing I'll really look at today is going to be, we have the estate analysis, that's great, but what does this look like as a report? Because, unless you're sitting with the client directly in front of them and you're able to just show this to them on their computer, what does this look like if I print out a PDF report? Am I able to give this to them as a take-home kind of item? And you can. So if I go to the gear icon here in the very top right, and then go to reports, this will bring us to the full report page. Anyone who uses the software for any amount of time should, be very familiar with this. This is where you can check off all the different pages you want in a PDF report. But if I go down to estate, I can actually check off all three of these. So the checklist, the beneficiary, and the analysis, and then just go to download the selected pages. I'll give this a second to download. We'll actually take a look at what this looks like. So there we go. So if I jump in, scroll past all this. So pretty simple. Again, for the most part, when you're doing a report, what you see is going to be very similar to the actual page in the system. This is really no different here with the estate. So right off the bat, the checklist is in here. Again, I didn't have a lot of information here. We can see like that's checked off. If I had the name of the executor and guardian here, that would appear in this section down here. Same thing for Mara. She has that area. So again, what you see in the checklist system is basically what you get. So if I go here, we can see, again, looks pretty similar to what we're seeing in the PDF. Very simple. Next is up is beneficiaries. Again, same idea. If I go to beneficiaries here, it's going to look pretty much exactly what this page looks like. Again, it's just in a PDF format. So, again, if you need to give them a take home, this is a little bit easier. And something I also do mention with this is because of the nature of these pages, this isn't a terrible report to give out as kind of like almost like a homework assignment. I hesitate to call it that, but what you could do is give this to somebody and say, hey, I actually need you to go home and check these out for me, and like put in the name of the executor. So in this case, because this is empty, they could actually just fill in this information themselves and then hand it back to you or email it back to you or whatever, anything like that, right? So again, you don't have to do it that way, but I have seen people use the estate checklist and beneficiary sections in that way because they look so similar, which is like, hey, just fill this out and give it back to me, and then I can put that information in and we're all set. So again, it has the accounts in there, has the numbers, gives them a way to check off, especially if they need to check beneficiary information on all their accounts. They can actually just go down the line and go, yep, savings is done, checking is done, all the investment accounts are set up. That's great. So again, just a very easy way to have them do that at home, just because, maybe they have trouble logging in. They don't have to worry about that. They just have the paper in front of them. That'll bring us to the last couple pages here, which is the actual analysis section. Again, very similar. If I go to the flow chart here, it's pretty much just verbatim what we see on that estate page, right? So if I go to analysis and we look at this flow chart, it's a little bit more compact because it's portrait mode. but you can see it's basically just the same setup. If I scroll down, this will get us to the actual estate planning portion. Again, this is formatted a little bit differently. What you're seeing here is that comparison page, right? So we can see, again, if I go back, this is the comparison. So it has this information, again, just right on the PDF. So if you did have a trust strategy in here set up, this will look a little bit different. And then it'll have the action items in there. So again, all that stuff I have set up, very same stuff here, all reflected down here. That's basically it. Now, this is extensive. One thing I do recommend is if you're going to do reports, you typically don't want to have every item selected. So for example, like I have all of these items selected that aren't really doing a whole lot. If I wanted them out of the report, I could just simply come in here, turn them all off, press save. And then when I reprint the report, actually I might do it again real quick just to show. But if I go to reprint the report, this will look a lot cleaner. So if I go back, download, give this a second to kind of do its thing, what we'll see is that this is a lot, it should be one page now instead of two for that flow section. So if I go here, yeah, there we go. So now actually extends over a little bit because I get the existing trust. But as you can still see, it's definitely a lot less information on here. It's not going halfway down the page or anything like that. It's just that one item. So again, typically, and this is going to be the case with a lot of stuff in the system, less is more, right? If you don't need it in the system, turn it off. If I wasn't adjusting their planning horizon, same thing, I could go in and shut that off and it would make the report look a lot cleaner. That's a recommendation, by the way, for just about anything in the system, especially with stuff like cash flows. If you don't need it in there, turn it off, makes it look cleaner. It's easier to read, whole 9 yards there. Lastly, it'll give us the retirement income section. Again, this is the same as retirement details. So if you're already printing that part, you don't really need this. And then lastly, just kind of that balance sheet portion for the estate. So again, that's really it for the report. If I go down here, this just goes down to the disclosures. So that's really it. But when you print out that estate analysis section, you're really just getting a part of each one. So you're getting, again, the flow, comparison with action items, retirement income, and the finally like balance sheet view. And that'll be about it. So again, you don't have to use the reports. Not everyone, not everyone even really needs to use the estate module itself because it is a little bit more of a niche use. But when you do need it, it's available. It's got plenty of information in there to help you get started with that planning. And past that, there's a few different ways to use it. Like I mentioned, you can do everything in Office by going through the checklist in here, or you could just hand the piece of paper to them, have them mark it in themselves. You're all set. So there's a few different ways to use it. But that will really kind of do it for the full analysis. So one last thing I will kind of go through here we'll start moving closer into the Q&A section. But before that, I just want to go over some really popular questions we get. Again, these are typically the most popular questions we get. First up, typically is just how are probate expenses calculated. Like we saw, they're specified to use the action items at the bottom of the estate. So if I go here back to the flow chart, it is based on this percentage. That's what it's going to come from. However, what does this actually come from? Basically, what this is, it's a percentage of the gross estate excluding qualified accounts, right? So again, I'll say that one more time. This percentage will take off as a fee a percentage of the gross estate excluding qualified accounts. So we're going to make the assumption that qualified accounts like 401ks and IRAs have beneficiaries already assigned and will not go to probate. Same thing for jointly owned assets such as properties or businesses. Those will also be excluded only on first death. And I know that can be a little confusing. Again, there's a reason this is a popular question. Again, probate is a percentage of the gross estate excluding qualified accounts because we assume that those have beneficiaries assigned. And jointly owned assets will be excluded upon the first death. Again, so when Luke passes away and has all these like real estate items, that will not have any probate fee. He has some probate fee from investments, but for jointly owned assets, that will not go through. When Mara passes away with those jointly owned assets, then it will go to probate. So it is something important to mention. Again, it doesn't affect literally every single account in the system. We do make a couple of assumptions there, so that is important to keep in mind. I did go over this briefly, but there is also the question, again, this is very popular. Do beneficiary designations entered here, actually affect the estate analysis? No. Again, you can have a completely different beneficiary set up here than you do in the system if you wanted to. I don't know why you would want to do that, but you could. This is purely for note-taking purposes. This doesn't affect anything within the system. So again, I could put in some crazy names here, go to the estate analysis, and again, that would not reflect. One important note for that though, again, because the follow-up question would be like, okay, well then how do I set up something like beneficiaries? It depends on the account. Again, I won't go super in depth with it. For example, insurance policies, typically you actually name who will receive the death benefit. That's a more direct example. If it was something like a taxable account, you won't do that. There is an alternative though, which is if I go to this gear icon and then go to settings, and then lastly go to account assumptions. So again, that's gear icon, settings, account assumptions. This, now it has this option here for, the value used to calculate RMDs. But this setting right here, this percent to co-client setting, will control, hey, when one person dies, what percentage of this type of account should go to the co-client? What should go to the heirs? So for example, if I go to Luke here, I say, hey, when he passes away, 50% should go to the co-client. So when he passes away, again, 401k, 50% will go to the co-client. I can press save here. And then when I go back to the estate, what we should see, now I don't have the previous one up, but we should see that a lot less of the money goes to, yeah, I actually can't see it here. So a lot less of that will go to the inheritance. Again, we know the previous number, but you can see that a larger portion is actually going to the heirs. So what this is that portion of the 401k that we told that, it's not going to the co-client, whatever percentage they do not receive from that settings menu will go to the heirs automatically. Again, so if I go right back there, if I go to account assumptions, again, I have it set to 50%, saying 50% goes to co-client, and then 50% will just go to quote unquote heirs, right? Also a place where the beneficiary checklist can be helpful. So if I have just that 50% marked, right, and then I go to analysis and I say, okay, well, heirs is a little open. What does that actually mean? I could maybe go check here and say, oh, that's Ben, because it's not going to Mara, it's going to her, right, or going to him. So a little bit of an easier way to show that, so that makes it a little bit easier. Next tab up is, or next question, I should say, is can I propose a future trust purchase? Again, we did go over this. That's where this is done. If you propose a future trust, you can also set the funding year, which is really important. Because if I go back to the profile here, so if I go to profile net worth and go to investment, right? If I go to this trust investment account, the assumption here is that it pretty much already exists, right? If I have a trust set up in their profile net worth, it's already in there. They already have it set up. So if you're looking at like, hey, they don't have a trust yet, but I do want them to set one up in the future, this is where you're going to do it, right? I'm going to go to analysis. I'm going to go to this proposed trust section, add a new trust, and then I can actually say, hey, this is when it gets funded. So again, future trusts will always be done in the estate analysis. If they already own the trust, though, that's going to be in the profile section. So something important to mention. And lastly, another important question, do we account for state level estate taxes? Yes. So state level estate taxes may be calculated based on state specific rules. Again, there's a lot, every state does things differently. Obviously, there's going to be some different rules on that. But it's always going to be based on the resident state at the end of the proposed plan, right? It will capture that for any real estate that might be in a different state, but generally their estate taxes are going to follow what is at the end of the plan. So for example, when I go to this client's profile right now, right, if I go to family, I have their resident state set as New York. So if they continue to live there, when they get to when they eventually pass away and get into estate planning or get into estate taxes, it will follow New York rules, right? However, if I had a different plan, for example, if I go to retirement analysis, and I can actually set this up live. So if I go to this plan, for example, move to Florida, right? What I could do is, I'll actually set this up real quick. So I'll set up a primary home relocation. I'm going to say they're going to go to Florida eventually. Let's get Florida out of there. Picked a very poor day not to wear my glasses, apparently. There we go. Florida. So I can say maybe they do it in 2040. They buy the home outright. Let's say it's just, I'll throw in some random stuff here. Let's say it's $200,000, nothing crazy. They don't pay any taxes there, whatever. They're going to sell their previous home, press save. Again, I'm not going to fret over the details here, But now what I have this move to Florida plan where they actually end up moving to Florida in 2040, which means that's where they will pass eventually. When I go to the estate, go to analysis, proposed plan still has them living in New York. So that's what's going to reflect here, right? In fact, I think we might be able to see, I guess in this case, they don't really have any state taxes, but if I went to move to Florida, that would change. Like, hey, if they did have any state tax available, that would change what they're paying. Again, in this case, I don't have that set up. So I guess I don't have anything that really hits state taxes. I think they're under the limit in their plan. But anyway, point is, it will reflect wherever they pass. Again, I'm saying it one more time because that is important. State level of tax, state taxes are calculated based on where they eventually pass away. So the thing you always want to check is like, hey, the state they have set up and profile that they're starting in might not be the one they actually end up paying taxes to in case they move. And we also do, I should mention, we do track the estate exemption rules as well. That's why we're not seeing anything here. So again, if you do see in a scenario like mine where you don't have any taxes or fees, typically that's why they're under the exemption limit, so they don't have to worry about it.